I work at a hotel as a front desk clerk, and I mostly work second and third shift. It's not bad really. It's primarily a place for truckers staying a night because it's on the warehouse district side of town. So foot traffic is very little during the day, and even less at night. I came in for my graveyard shift, which I was lucky to be doing with another co-worker instead of alone like usual. My other co-worker, who was clocking out, said that she had a really creepy guy come in, saying that he was praising God while watching the TV, kept asking what year it was, and was shocked that it was indeed 2019, and so on. I figured it was probably just another case of some guy high off his ass or drunk being a nuisance. That's typical and not a big deal. About 30 minutes later, a man walks in and sort of paces around the lobby. Very average-looking guy wearing nice clothing with a trench coat on. He's jumping in place and looking around before he comes up to the front desk, explaining that he was here earlier and tried to get a room but was told he couldn't use his reward points. This point of the conversation was the most lucid it would get. I explained to him that our hotel, because it's such a small location, isn't authorized to use customers' reward points. He was disappointed and said he had nowhere to go and he had to pick up his kid from school tomorrow. I apologized and asked him if he would like to pay our regular price for a room, and he declined. My co-worker then went to the laundry room to get blankets for someone. Things got uncomfortable. He said that when he was in high school, he read a book about hotel fires and how they started, and that he always comes prepared now. He gave a weird grin. I sort of awkwardly laughed it off and went back to printing out reports. He followed me on the opposite side of the desk over to the computer I was at and continued to talk. The conversation went something like this. Him.
You want to know something?
Me. I'm sorry? Him.
Ever since I modified my eyes, I can see so much more. I added thermal vision. I can see spirits.
Okay.
They're everywhere. This place is absolutely crawling with them. Spirits are tied to our DNA. When we enter a place and leave our DNA, we leave parts of our spirit.
Alright.
That's why I brought this for you.
Then he placed what looked like an old box of donuts and an old pizza box on the counter in front of me and opened it.
This is your last supper.
He started to frantically reach through his jacket for something, and I was beginning to internally panic. I placed my cell phone underneath the counter where he couldn't see and texted my girlfriend while having my hand on the desk phone. To be honest, I had no idea what to do. He pulled out a pen and started writing on a piece of paper some weird symbols, and said they were found all over his house that was built in the 1800s. I nervously said, maybe you should move houses. He blankly stared for a moment, then placed a grocery bag on the counter. He said there were ashes in it, and that he was going to
return their spirits to the earth.
At this point, my co-worker came back from the laundry, and I managed to get out of the conversation. He apparently went into the parking lot, then through the back of the building again. Several people called the front desk saying they were scared of him. I called the police and told them he was disturbing a lot of people here. My co-worker told me to go home because I couldn't stop checking the parking lot for him. I feel terrible. I've never had an encounter like that before. I hope to God I don't see him ever again. I work at a gas station on a main route. We see a lot of travelers passing through. Only one person works each shift, and it's a 24-hour store. We are short-staffed, so I agreed to an overnight. I'm female, and I work in a state that's always had self-serve gas stations. So this guy comes in. I ask him if he needs any help. He says no, he's getting gas at the pump but needs to use the bathroom. I go back to work on whatever invoices we got yesterday. The guy uses the bathroom and then goes back outside. About 5, maybe 7 minutes later, he comes back inside and tells me that he's confused about the pump. He directly says,
You might have to come outside to help me.
Customers don't often say this. They usually just complain that it's not working, so I'm already feeling weird about this guy. I shake it off because he looks like a nerd, and I don't feel afraid of him really. I look at the register to see what error it came up with for his pump, and there's no errors. The register doesn't even say it's in use. Even if someone tries to pay and nothing's wrong with their payment, it will at least say payment or loyalty timed out. Literally, it had no sign of him trying to use it before coming in and asking me for help. I ask if he just wants to pay inside. He agrees to, gets his wallet out of his car, and then pays $10. I give him his receipt and he says,
Can you help me? I don't understand the machine.
and I say, we aren't really allowed to leave the store during overnight shifts as it's just me here and it's not safe to go outside. I don't know why I told him I was alone, but he wasn't really seeming threatening. He proceeds to say,
I don't understand what it's asking me. I need help. I'm not scary.
I tell him again that I can't go outside because it's a store policy for the overnight shift. I say, it's not that you're scary, I can't go outside. I would have to tell a little old lady asking for help at this hour the same thing. I mean, this is true, we can't even take out the trash during overnight shifts. He starts to walk away from the register counter now, but then again he stops at the door and asks me one last time to come outside and help him. I'm pretty annoyed at this point. I've said no twice now, so no, I'm not going to. Stop asking. I finally say in a super annoyed tone, okay, all you need to do is 1. Pick up the nozzle, 2. Select your fuel grade button, and 3. Put it into your tank and squeeze the handle. I'm not going outside. He finally goes back to the car and the register tells me he had no trouble pumping gas. Also, his plates seem like they're from the state I work in. This kind of thing wouldn't make me suspicious usually, but the fact he originally opted for me to go outside instead of bringing money inside at 3 AM is weird. Along with how he didn't bother to use the pump before he came inside to ask for help. Instead he claimed it wasn't working, and he didn't take my first no for an answer, or my second. No means no. So, potential gas station abductor, let's not meet again. I am a woman that works night audit at a small hotel property in a small-ass town. I am used to working alone, and it takes quite a bit to scare me or freak me out. I have dealt with domestic disturbances, hostile homeless men twice my size, and I helped get rid of the prostitution problem on our property. So when I say that this man really creeped me the fuck out, know that it means a lot. What is it with this week, man? Every night has been some other dumpster fire for me to put out, but oh boy, does tonight's particularly creepy dumpster fire take the cake. So I'm sitting at the desk, browsing Reddit, as you do, when a guest heads my way from the first floor rooms. I don't think much of it. He gets up to me and picks up a brochure for our rewards program and starts asking me about it. No big deal, it's legit my job to answer these questions. He starts off his questions standing catty corner to me and ends up right in front of me. He says thanks and leaves. Was he kind of awkward? Yeah, but not anything I haven't dealt with before. About 5 to 10 minutes pass and here he comes again, this time saying that a friend of his is supposed to come pick him up and he wants to know if anyone has come by asking about him. I tell him no, that no one's been in a while. Honestly, this was my first mistake, but hindsight and all that. He paces back and forth in the lobby for a few minutes before asking if he can stand to the side of the front desk, almost right next to me, as something was wrong with his neck, and he couldn't see out the door properly. This was the second red flag, because there was a couch directly in front of me that had a section. If you sat there you could face the door and parking lot, but I apparently lost my goddamn mind tonight. I say, I guess. He stands there and starts asking questions about his room, saying that he was supposed to be transferring to a suite tomorrow. We are an all-suites property. I said I didn't know anything about that, but asked for his last name so I could check. He wouldn't tell me his name. He kept mouthing something at me and then whispering something just barely audible. It really seemed to me that he wanted me to lean in to hear what he was saying, but hell no, man. By this point I was already uncomfortable and just stared at him, telling him several times that I am hard of hearing and he will need to speak up. When that didn't work, I asked what his room number was so I could look it up that way. He said he didn't remember. Okay, I ask him what floor he's on. He says he doesn't know. Now, I watched him come from the first floor rooms and I knew that he was staying down there. I just wasn't sure what room he was in. So now I know that for some reason he doesn't want me to know what room he is staying in. This starts to make me feel really unsafe. He finally gives me a last name. I tell him we have no one here under that name. He says,
Oh, maybe it's under my boss's name.
he can't give me a name for his boss either. He then says maybe it's under his company name, but he told me he works for the highway patrol, for a small mechanic shop. He told me that he works general construction under a contractor whose name he doesn't know. While he tells me all this, he keeps doing that weird whisper thing, trying to get me to lean closer to him. My brain is flashing red neon warning signs and screaming danger at me as loud as possible. I print off a random piece of paper from the computer and tell him I need to step into the back office to make some copies. He seems to take the hint and heads back down the hallway, leaving me free to freak out in the back and grab my pepper spray. As I walk back out, I realize that instead of actually leaving, he just moved around the corner, out of sight, to wait for me to come back to the desk. I feel better armed with my pepper spray and I'm ready to haul ass and lock myself in the back office if he tries anything. This time he doesn't stay long. He just asks about the restaurant he can see out the door. He wants to know if it would be safe walking down there by himself. I tell him he will be fine, that I walk down there by myself all the time. Stupid, I know. Super fucking stupid. I even told him I'd never had any problems. He angles for a ride for a little bit, but I lied on this one and told him I didn't have a car. He leaves and heads down to this restaurant, while I am just glad that this finally seems to be over. He has only gone around 15 minutes when he walks back in the door carrying a cup from the restaurant, saying how he didn't like the food there. I tell him that's too bad, and make myself look busy with paperwork. He seems to take the hint and leaves again. By this point, every interaction with him has left me feeling more creeped out and unsafe than the last. I started texting my husband telling him what was going on. The last time I saw him last night, I heard him coming down the hall because he was on the phone. When I looked up, he was staring at me really intently, so I gathered some papers and went into the back office to avoid him. I heard him pass the desk and go out the doors, so I peeked into my manager's office to see him standing at her window, peering in, trying to see me from there. I called my husband at that point and told him to haul ass up here because I just can't do this anymore. As I'm on the phone, I get the courage to peek back around the corner to the manager's office he was peeping into and notice that he is gone. I told my husband to be on the lookout for this guy walking outside of the hotel or between the hotel and the restaurant. I look out the window and I don't see him anywhere, but I go back to hiding just in case. My husband comes flying into the parking lot and comes in to find me hiding in the back. He tells me that he looked everywhere and didn't see anyone. Within 1 minute, this creepy guy comes in the front door trying to talk to me over my husband, but after a very murderous look from my wonderful man, he booked out of the lobby and didn't come back in for the rest of the night. I had my husband stay to play security guard just in case. Nothing came of it until this morning when the housekeeper filling in for the regular breakfast attendant lets me know that the same guy was around yesterday morning. He was denied a room by our manager for creeping out the housekeeper. The manager even had to go with her to take out the trash because this guy was so unsettling. When I was 15 years old, I landed my first ever job, delivering newspapers. The route I had to take wasn't too far from where I was living, and there were no twists and turns for me to take. It was just one long street where I had to deliver to both sides. There were usually so many people on that street wanting their newspaper delivered that I'd have to do one side first, go back to the shop I worked for to grab the rest of the newspapers, then go back out and deliver the remainder. I had to do this because it was pretty much impossible to carry 2 full bags at once, and I did the whole thing on a push bike to make things go a little quicker. I had to do this job before school every morning, and I'd usually start making the deliveries at about 5:15 AM. Most of the time I'd be done by 6:30 AM, depending on how tired I was or what the weather was like. If it was raining or windy, it made the whole thing much more difficult. I should also note that the street was located in a small countryside town. Most of the people on the street lived in really nice houses with some pretty sizable gardens. The 4th or 5th house I used to have to deliver to had big iron gates with a nice driveway leading up to the house itself. Usually these gates were locked, so I was instructed to simply leave the newspaper in the mailbox on the wall next to it. However, there was one time where I pulled up to this house and was immediately confronted by the woman who owned it. She looked like she was maybe in her late 60s, donned in an old brown dressing gown. I'd had some early risers come out to grab the paper themselves from time to time, so I thought this was just going to be another example of that. I was wrong. She had her face pressed through the gap between 2 of the bars of her gate, both of her hands clutched tightly at each side of her face. She was grinning widely at me, which really kind of freaked me out. The conversation I had went something like this. "Good morning. Got your paper here. Do you want it, or should I just stick it in the box? Better hand it here, but next time, please come to the front door and post it. Your gates are usually locked, and the guy at the shop told me to just put it in the mailbox. I will keep them open for you. I just wanted to tell you." "Sure, that's fine. Sorry about that." So I offered the newspaper out to her, and she practically snatched the thing out of my hands. This was the first encounter I had with her, and it wouldn't have even been that bad if I hadn't looked back as I was going further down the street. I saw her standing in the middle of the empty road, still staring at me. Honestly, it just freaked me the hell out. Like, every time I went into someone else's garden up to their house, I thought she was just going to be right behind me when I turned back. After a few more houses, she eventually went back inside. That kind of put me more on edge because I wasn't sure if she was hiding somewhere or what. I couldn't see her. I was only 15 at the time, so yeah, my mind was pretty rampant with the creepy vibes she gave me. The next morning when I got to her house again, the gates were unlocked, so I took a deep breath and went to the front door. As soon as I started to push the newspaper through the letterbox, the door swung open and she was there again. The first thing I noticed was the smell coming from the inside of the house. It was like rotting meat. It was like someone had left a bunch of old food lying around. This was the second and, thank God, last time I ever spoke with her. "I heard you open the gates." "Yeah, they're pretty squeaky, sorry. I was trying to be quiet." "I know. I like to know when people come to my door, so I leave it like that." "Fair enough. I was just posting your paper." "Thank you. Would you like a cup of tea?" "I'm good, thank you. I have to get the rest of the street done." "The boy before you came in for tea." "Did he?" "He wasn't very polite, though." "Ah, I didn't really know him, sorry." "He quit the job the day after." "Oh, do you know why?" "Yes." "Oh, okay, I won't pry." "I will let you go now. Have fun." "Alright, take care then." After that, I hurried back down the driveway and hopped on my bike. At that point, I was nearly sick because of the smell coming from her house. I was thinking maybe she was just a bit mentally ill or something. I kinda got that vibe from her. The next day the gates were locked again, so I just resumed putting her newspaper in the mailbox. I actually ended up asking the guy I worked for at the shop about the previous boy a while later. He told me that the boy had gone inside because he was too polite to say no. When he got in there, he was told to wait in the living room while she made tea. Apparently, there were 2 dead cats nailed to the table in the living room. He just up and left without saying a word to her. As soon as I heard that's what happened, I told him that I didn't want the job anymore. I was 23 years old, in grad school working towards my MLIS and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at West Valley, so I applied for a position at the largest Stone River library system and was hired there. The new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches, but I continued working at West Valley too. My first shift with the Stone River library system was a Monday night at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need much training because I was already familiar with the software they used and working with the public. One of my new co-workers was explaining some of the unique policies this library had when a patron came up and asked where he could find books about World War II. My co-worker asked if I could handle the question, and I said I could. Before the co-worker walked away, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her, she's new." The patron was heavy-set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I told him he'd want to look at the 940s in the adult non-fiction section, and he wandered away. Several minutes later, he came back. He said he was having trouble finding the section, and that maybe I could help him find the specific book he wanted. I started searching our system for the title he requested. He then introduced himself to me as Jim and extended his hand over the desk to shake my hand. I awkwardly shook his hand and went back to searching for the book. He was acting overly familiar with me, and he was very talkative, telling me all about himself. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really unusual in public libraries. Often people come to the library just to have someone to talk to. We didn't own the title he was looking for, but I told him I could place a hold on it and have it sent here from another library. I placed the hold, and I told him he would get a phone call when the book arrived here for him. He then told me that the phone number on his account was his home phone number, but he would prefer that we call his cell phone. I offered to change the phone number for notifications to his cell phone number. He said he didn't want to do that because his wife wants calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when his book arrives. This was a really strange request. I told him I couldn't do that because I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries and I'm only here part-time. He attempted a sad puppy dog face and said,
"Come on, please, for me."
I told him the best I could do was change the phone number on his account to his cell phone. He declined and didn't press this issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 940s in adult non-fiction. I walked across the library to the 940s section with him. I don't remember our exact conversation in the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me. At some point, he said something along the lines of,
"You look so young, but you seem to really know what you're doing. It's hard to believe you're new here."
I told him I'm new to this library system, but I've worked at another library nearby for several months, and I also work at another branch of this library. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I sidestepped the questions as best as I could and completely made up the few things I did tell him, but I've always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable conversations like this. After about 15 minutes, I told him that the library was really busy tonight and I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out of the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me, held it very tightly, and said,
"You should give me your number."
I was completely shaken that he'd touched me, and I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore. I semi-screamed, "No, I'm not interested," and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power walked back to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then caught shit from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for almost 20 minutes. By the time my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I placed the hold for him, opened the transaction log, and opened his library account from there. I wrote down his card name, his full name, and his address. The next day was my first day of work at the Crestmont branch. It was uneventful. Thursday, I worked at the Crestmont branch again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me that someone called looking for me on Wednesday but didn't want to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been, and I shrugged it off. Later that day, a co-worker told me that there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call, and it was Jim. He said he was just calling to talk. This had the hair on the back of my neck standing up because I realized that he must have been the person who called looking for me yesterday. I told him that I can't just talk to people on the phone while I'm at work and not to call here again. He said if I gave him my cell phone number, he could call me when I'm not at work and we could talk. I told him again that I'm not interested, and I hung up the phone. The supervisor overheard this. I explained what happened at the Cherry Lane branch, and she wrote up an incident report about everything. She sent it to the director of SRLS and the supervisors at all 4 branches. Friday afternoon, the director of SRLS called me at home. He told me that Jim had apparently called all 4 SRLS branches on Wednesday. He had showed up at one branch trying to find me, asking where and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter, drafted by SRLS's lawyer, that he planned to send to Jim. He asked me to read over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized the incidents from Cherry Lane on Monday and Crestmont on Thursday. It warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with a library employee while they are performing their duties. It went on to say, if it were not apparent from the employee's tone of voice, I want to make it clear that your personal attention directed at her is unwanted. It is expected that you will not continue to seek out interactions with this employee. All future interactions you have with library employees will be based upon library services and will not become personal. Failure to comply with this warning will result in you being banned from the Stone River Library system for a period of time commensurate with your misconduct. I told the director that I thought this might be a little bit harsh because I could just be overreacting about the whole situation. But he said that everything about Jim's interactions with me had been inappropriate and he wanted to stop this in his tracks. I agreed he should send the letter. On Sunday, I worked at the West Valley Library. Shortly after the library opened, I answered a phone call and it was Jim. I was shocked and scared because I never told him that I worked at this library. He said he really wanted to see me and that if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come to the library and we could talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear, so I told him that I was sorry if I gave him the wrong impression, but I'm not interested in talking to him on the phone or in person or ever again at all. He started saying things like,
I thought you were a good person. You seemed so nice. You shouldn't treat me like this.
I said I have to go and hung up the phone. A co-worker who overheard the conversation convinced me to file a police report just in case. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and went over everything. They told me they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him about the situation and see where things stand. They said if I saw him following me anywhere, I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at the Cherry Lane branch again. I was kind of nervous that Jim might come in since he knew I would be working there, and because he had probably just received a warning letter from my boss and a visit from the police, but he didn't show up. My co-workers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing. As we approached our cars, I saw that my car's hood was popped. When we got closer, I saw that all 4 windows plus the front and rear windshields had been smashed in. There were also dozens of deep dents to the metal panels and cracks and holes punched through the bumper and other plastic sections of my car. Inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs stopped supporting me. I collapsed onto the blacktop and I immediately threw up. This is the first and only time in my life I've experienced actual panic. My co-workers hoisted me back up and half ran / half dragged me back into the library where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located Jim's car several blocks away, and inside it they found empty bleach containers, a hammer, and a full set of his clothing. Shoes, socks, pants, underwear, a shirt, and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police that he was at a local bar watching a football game. The police were never able to locate Jim, and as far as I understand, he never returned to his house or his wife. I didn't stick around to find out though. Over the next 2 days, I quit both of my jobs, dropped out of school, broke my apartment lease, and moved several hundred miles away. But now I carry pepper spray, I'm a black belt in Krav Maga, and I don't run from threats anymore. So Jim, let's meet the fuck up.